I've been to Asia over 30 times, and I've gotten to know a number of Christian leaders there, and some of them have been sitting in prison now for a number of years, and I just got news of another one who recently got arrested. And it made me think again, that oftentimes loving Jesus and going to jail are like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together, and it sounds radical to us, but join us while we talk about how it's really routine. Hey, Mark, it's good to see you again today and to be with you.
Good morning, John.
I want to welcome all who may be joining us on YouTube or on TV or however you're seeing this. It's always a delight to be able to have this opportunity to talk to Mark and to have people join us in this discussion and to share it with others. Yesterday or the day before, I read a story about the pastor at the Early Rain Church in Chengdu, China, who just got arrested.
Yep.
And it made me again think of the strong connection there is between Jesus and jails. And I want to talk to you about that today. Jesus and jails.
Jesus and jails. I like it.
Jesus and jails. As you know, Mark, I have been to the Early Rain Church. I've been there multiple times, actually.
You may not remember, but I was there with you one time to teach for a week.
Okay, well, that's
at
good.
The seminary.
I did not remember that.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that most of us, at least in this country, we don't have friends who we respect and love as leaders of the Christian church, pastors who are sitting in jail.
That's right.
But you and
don't think
we
any
have
of my
actual real friends.
Yeah, I don't think any of my American pastors that I've ever worked with have ever really sat in jail for any portion of the time that I've known them. But you and I both know people, friends who are in jail or have been long time in jail. People
that we have prayed with, people that we've had lunch with, people whose ministry we've come alongside who are now sitting. I think of one particular leader who's now in year 7 of a 9-year prison sentence. I was last with him in 2018. And it continues to happen around the world. And I just wanted to bring up the subject of Jesus and jails together because in many parts of the world, Jesus and jails is like talking about peas and carrots or peanut butter and jelly. They just automatically go together.
Yeah, that's right. Instead of being like oil and water.
I would say that our experience here in the United States is more of the exception rather than the rule. But it's hard to remember that. You have had enough mission experiences and life experiences where being stopped or being interrogated, if not fully jailed, became a part of the routine part of your life. I just think it'll be helpful for people to hear a little bit about your perspective and your experience on this.
In that regard, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind just automatically is the Peter verse where he writes to his people, "Don't be surprised when these things happen to you. This is normal when trials and tribulations and imprisonments." He doesn't say that there, but kind of included, almost implied in that list is anything that's really bad, like going to jail for your faith. These things shouldn't surprise us as Christians, and to the extent that they don't happen to us here, we really should be grateful that we've escaped what is for many the normal experience of the Christian life, which is to swim so against the stream of the culture that in order to live out your faith, it requires being willing to pay certain prices, like imprisonment or death. And in certain Asian countries where you and I have visited and lived, it certainly is the lived experience of our friends. And for me personally, being a long-term missionary in Asia, there were times when I was arrested. There were times when I was interrogated. There were times when we were taken through intimidation sessions. There were times when we went to prison. I bragged with my kids, hey, I've never been arrested, in America. I don't have any criminal record in America. The only places where I've ever been stopped and detained and questioned and stuffed in a jail cell are overseas.
Yeah, I can't say that. I've actually been arrested probably a dozen times in the United States.
Yeah.
And a few times overseas, but
why? Because you're some sort of terrible person? What were you doing to get arrested, John? In the United States? Don't leave people hanging on that one.
Well, I read about all those bank robbers during the Depression era, and I thought I'd give it a go. No
way.
We were involved. We were involved. My wife and I were both involved in some of the nonviolent, prayerful sit-ins of the late '80s and early '90s with Operation Rescue.
Yeah.
We had at that point we had sometimes 20 and 30 people from our churches that would go out with us with 200 or 300 other people, and prayerfully and quietly sit down in front of the doors at Planned Parenthood, for example.
Yeah.
And and we were routinely arrested, and on occasion spent several days in the county local jails. But the point of it is, while that sounds very radical to us and to all of our friends, it's routine in much of the world of suffering for doing what is right. And I think the temptation for people in America is to just assume that if you get arrested, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Rather than to recognize that when people get arrested for being faithful to Jesus, that ought to be more of a challenge to us. Are we living a radically attractive, winsome life that in some cases can get us in trouble? And I'm not looking for trouble, but the point is we ought not to run from it either.
You make the point that there are some people who believe that if you do something illegal or get imprisoned, that means you're doing something that is wrong, that you shouldn't be a part of. And the inverse corollary of that is also true. There are people who believe that anything that is legal is therefore morally permissible. And I think that we do fight that sometimes with, especially the opposition in the pro-life world, saying, well, it's legal in most of America to have an abortion, even into late pregnancy. And that means it's okay. That means there's nothing wrong with it. The government says that it's fine.
Exactly. We need to be more biblically wise and responsive to what's going on. And, again, even in countries where being arrested for being faithful is more routine, I will tell you from my observation that it still becomes very divisive. Some people want to say you got arrested because you were too radical, or you were foolish, or you were trying to test the law, or whatever. That's very much a real thing in places like China. And I am reminded when I read that story about Pastor in Chengdu getting arrested of verse in 2 Timothy 1:8. I really think it's worth reading. Let me read it to you. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me, his prisoner. This is the Apostle Paul sitting in prison, writing to young Timothy, helping him to process what's happened with biblical wisdom and insight. And he says, do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me, his prisoner, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. Share in the suffering and do it by the power that God supplies. These are radical, powerful, disciple-making verses.
Yeah, they're verses that really don't make sense outside of the Christian context. To join with me in my suffering, that is just something that doesn't compute in the material world. Yeah.
Now, when you were going through these interrogations and arrests,
yes,
can you give us our listeners a little insight as to what was going on in your head? I mean, were you frightened, or did you receive some sort of miraculous peace, or was it more of a mixture, or did you react different at the beginning than you did after you went through this 3 or 4 times. Kind of tell us from an experiential, how did you process it by faith? How did you suffer by faith?
Those are all good questions. And first of all, I will say that as a long-term church planting missionary in Asia, we often went through trainings. We went to conferences where there would be speakers who would speak on different topics that were relevant to the experience that we were living. Sometimes it was on how to plant churches strategically, and sometimes it was how to spark prayer movements and this and that. But I had a fella who recognized that my wife and I were the kinds of missionaries that were willing to go to far-flung places, maybe some places that other missionaries didn't necessarily feel going, or doing certain things that other missionaries did. This guy recognized this in us and said, I'd like to have lunch with you, because if you keep doing what you're doing, you need to learn how to be arrested well.
Oh,
and
how about that?
I remember being struck by that. I had lunch with this guy who had been arrested in Asia a couple of times, several times, and he just gave me kind of a planning guide for what to do when you're arrested, how to think of it, how to pray through it, what to do, what not to do. It really should have been part of our training, not necessarily that our agencies were wanting us to get arrested or looking for us to get arrested. But it was very, very practical in that sense, because after that conversation, we did get arrested 2 or 3, at least 3 times after that. These are different situations and circumstances. Sometimes we could tell that these local policemen had been put up to it by their superiors. In other words, these might be friends of ours on the police force, maybe people that we have had to dinner in our own house, who are coming in and kind of bullying us around and pushing us around. But you can almost see in their eyes that there's a sympathetic, almost apologetic air behind the guise of the bullying, because they've just been put up to it. They're doing their job.
Yeah, kind of like, go along with this now. I got to do this for my superiors, kind of a thing.
Exactly right. And there are other times when it was actually a little more intimidating, in that we could tell that they meant business and they were really trying to extract information. And the information that they were trying to extract, I think primarily they were just trying to get us to contradict anything that we had said, so that they could press down deeper and have reason to go deeper in anything that they wanted to ask about. So they asked lots and lots of questions multiple times in multiple ways. And then they would have my wife in another room, or other people that they had arrested with me in another room, and they were asking the same questions, seeing if they could get any contradictory answers. And the truth is that, by and large, if you just tell the truth without revealing any unnecessary information, if you just tell the truth, that's probably in the long run going to be your best bet. You would rather have the police in these situations find out that you're a missionary than suspect you to be a agitator or a terrorist or a spy or something like that. Those are things that you want to make sure that they know that you're not there to do.
Well, were you scared, or were you at peace, or somewhere in between? I mean, just kind of give us the raw deal here.
I think it probably was different at different times, but I will tell you the most intimidating one that I went through was when I was walking down a street and I was very suddenly and very unexpectedly pushed off of the sidewalk by 2 men in plain clothes into an unmarked police car. And I found myself with 2 men in the front seat and 2 men in the back seat on either side of me. And they immediately, I don't know if I gave them my cell phone or if I had it in my hand, they had my cell phone and were going through it. And I knew that I was not going to be able to contact my wife, even to let her know where I was. That wasn't intimidating to me from a standpoint of, oh, am I going to get out of this? Oh, am I going to go to jail? Oh, am I going to get indicted for something? It was intimidating because I didn't know how long it would last. I was worried about my family worrying about me. I was worried about the potential that they could find out information from my phone that would put some of my local contacts in jeopardy. Usually in these circumstances, they don't want to have a big international scandal on their hands. And the worst they could do to us usually is deport us, but they could do much worse to our local friends. And those are the people that we were more concerned for.
Yeah. In general, being faithful to Jesus and going to jail for Jesus, if called upon, comes with the grace and the peace of Jesus. I think that was my experience. And it sounds to me like you did. And to the degree that you had anxiety, it was more desired that your wife would be at peace and knowing that it's in God's sovereignty, all is good. It's going to work out.
Exactly right. It would have been a lot more comfortable in many ways if my wife had been arrested with me, because she wouldn't have minded either.
It would have been more comfortable for her, so she wouldn't have to
It would have been better for her if she had been arrested with me.
Yeah. Now, this week we actually met with a pastor from India who works with us.
That's right.
And again, you're looking at India, especially in the northern part of India, Jesus and jails are routine.
They are indeed, and in increasing fashion.
Or Jesus, if not jail, then attack.
Yes, flogging.
Nigeria right now is full of this, but
yes.
Also in northern India. Can you help our people get a inside peek into what's going on there and what faith looks like in some of these places?
I will say that my observation is that persecution of Christians in India is on the rise. It is increasing. It is sometimes worse in some places than in others. And a lot of that is because of anti-conversion laws based on a increasingly Hindu nationalistic governmental platform. So the leader of India really wants for India to be all Hindu. He's a guy that I think is generally well accepted in the West for his international or his foreign policy. But we can't forget that this is a man who really does not like Christians and paves a way for Christians to be persecuted without there being any means of recourse for them to be protected or to claim that they've been wronged.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a little video of that. Let's take a quick break here and we'll come back, and I want our larger audience to see and to feel what routine Christianity can mean in parts of the world like northern India. So let's take a break.
The U.S. accounts for only 3% of the abortions that happen in our world each year, leaving 97% of the crisis before us as a world missions challenge. Would you join us in serving where the need is greatest? PassionLife, rescuing the most vulnerable where abortion is most concentrated.
As I travel all over the world, people commonly ask me what they can say and do to help a mother who's in a pregnancy-related crisis. And I always say to them, be ready to speak up and show them the simplest of things. Show them what their baby looks like. We call this the PassionLife Tiny Baby. It's what you look like at 9 weeks of age, and it's available. You can find more information about it on our website.
John, just by way of review, we've been talking a little bit about the fact that persecution and intimidation tactics are, and suffering is the biblical word, generally speaking, for this umbrella of what we're talking about. Suffering is normal in the Christian life, or it should be expected to be. It shouldn't be unusual when suffering comes along with living out the Christian life. And in many of the places where you and I and our partners are working, suffering is really quite commonplace. One of the things that we were talking about was India, and you mentioned this video, which I do want to bring up. This is a video that was passed to me by one of our local pastors who's on the ground in India. This is in a city where he and I have visited several times and done teaching together. And my understanding is that this particular church that you're seeing here is pastored by someone who has attended one of the 4 Questions trainings that we've done in the last couple of years. What you're seeing here is that you have Hindu nationalists who feel free and brazen and enabled to go in and berate and physically beat Christians, for being Christians. They are, at one point in this video, they actually begin to confiscate a lot of the things that belong to the church, including the offering box with money still locked inside of it. I think they took some computers, but the point is you can see that this thing really turned violent. And if you're asking yourself, where are the police? There's no policeman in this particular area who's going to do anything about this, because this is actually in line with what the government would like to see the Christians experience. I'm not saying that the government did this, but for some reason it's enabled. And it's a hard thing to see. It's a sad thing to see. It's a sad thing anytime it happens to anybody, even if it's not Christians. But Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. There is persecution of the Jews. There is persecution in some places of Muslims, but there's no religious group that is more persecuted worldwide than Christians.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a great part of that is because the police or the government are passive acceptors of the violence. They're not doing it themselves, but are passively accepting. And I've been in situations where I've seen that we were about to be arrested, and some activists came and they're poking us with pins and spitting on us and doing different things. And the police welcome it because they really want to discourage believers from gathering and doing what they're doing.
That's right. That's right.
Let me mention another point, though. In this picture I'm about to show you now, it's full of pictures of police in a church. This was in China. It was in Chengdu. It was in the very church that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I was about 30 minutes away from getting up to present to this group of people the biblical call to rescue the innocent and to bring good news to the guilty, and how we can do that by helping mothers who are in crisis. And the word had spread through their social networks. A pretty big crowd was gathered outside. There's a whole bunch more people inside, and about 30 policemen showed up right as I was getting ready to leave my hotel room to go over to the church. And all of a sudden I got a call saying, John, if you come over here, you're probably going to get arrested, because they're not going to let you in the building. And if you try to get in, then you'll be arrested. So I didn't really think that was very wise to go over there and get arrested on purpose. But what they did is they blocked everybody from going in that wasn't inside already. And then the people inside, they did what so many people do. They went in and they started to engage the police. They offered to pray with them. Some of them went outside the building and began to talk to the other believers that were there and encourage the believers to return good for evil, and to really, again, show the contrast, the radical nature of true Christianity is that it can love its enemies, and it can do good to those who do evil. And so these two pictures that you've seen are a real example of how I experienced and witnessed that.
It's a beautiful
China
thing to see
years
people engaging their persecutors with love and dignity and humility and reaching out to them. I love the idea of people going right into these hostile situations. Not when I say hostile situations, one of the things that I mean is I love the idea of people who go into prisons to do ministry, because it's a dark place that needs light. I'm reminded of Matthew 25 when the implication from Jesus is, if you give someone a drink who's thirsty, that's a good thing. If you give someone food or clothing who doesn't have those things, that's a good thing. And if you go to visit them when they're in prison, and you're not ashamed and you're not shirking them and you're not putting them off as if they are part of a plague, that's a good thing. That's a good, beautiful thing. That is what Jesus is endorsing, is that we should be able to go to people who are in prison and not be ashamed of them, as Paul said to Timothy.
Yeah. I had a brother once who called me up on the phone. He was very upset. He said, if you're getting arrested, you must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I just was a little bit aghast. I was a little shocked by that, but he was a good brother. And I said, well, let me just remind you of people that you love and admire, that all got arrested.
Yeah.
I start with John the Baptist.
There
Okay?
you go. Okay.
Mark 1. I'm just going to read some of these to you. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee proclaiming the gospel of God. And of course, he had his head cut off soon after. Of course, Jesus is a supreme example of someone who gets arrested and did no wrong.
Yeah, I don't think he did anything wrong by being arrested.
And then in Acts, it says that all the apostles got arrested. The high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is the party of the Sadducees, and they were filled with jealousy, and they arrested the apostles and put them in public prison. Peter got arrested. Herod proceeded to arrest Peter, seized him, and put him in prison. As I go back to Jesus in jail, peas and carrots.
Yep.
Paul was arrested multiple times, and by the time we start reading his letters, he's talking about not being ashamed of him who was in jail, and actually greeting fellow believers who he now calls his fellow prisoners.
Yes.
Okay, so Romans 16, greet Andronicus and Junia, my kinsmen and my fellow prisoners. Yep. So there's almost this fellowship of the suffering going on.
Something normal.
Among them. And then finally, I'm reminded in Revelation 2:10, we're talking about the church in Smyrna, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison. So that you may be tested. I think there's a lot of that going on. There are definitely hot spots around the world in which God is preparing his people to have peace, but be willing to suffer. So for those of us who are not necessarily going to jail, can you give us some general thoughts on this verse we talked about suffering with others and sharing in the suffering of the gospel?
Well, one of my first takeaways, even from listening to you, is to think of the people who have been in prison, not necessarily as having done something wrong. We're reminded sometimes people go to prison specifically because the law is what's wrong, or the people enforcing the law are doing something that's contrary to God's will, and we must obey God rather than man. So we need to have compassion for people who are imprisoned. We need to be praying for those who are persecuted, for sure. The Bible reminds us to do that in all circumstances, to pray for the persecuted. I don't think that we need to go out and look for ways to get arrested, but we need to think about the fact that suffering is a normative part of the Christian experience to some degree. Yeah.
And really honor those who have suffered deeply for their faith, maybe in ways that you haven't, and and find ways to share in their suffering. There are creative ways the Holy Spirit gives us to bear the burden and to be a cross-bearing people with people who are suffering. So let's do that together, Mark, and all who are with us, let us be a cross-bearing people.